Sair da escola já com uma formação profissional no currículo? Parece bom demais pra ser verdade, né? Pois é. No ensino técnico do Senac, isso é possível. É ensino médio junto com formação técnica, que acontece durante os 3 anos. Lá, eles usam metodologia para projetos, desenvolvendo competências como resolução de problemas, pensamento crítico e colaboração, além de valores éticos e sustentáveis. Quer saber? Senac. Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino médio e saiba mais.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and it's official. The GM Cadillac 11th team has been given the green light by F1 for 2026, so there will be 2 more cars on the grid. But what's changed to make it possible, and is the Andretti involvement what it once was? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to dissect the big news is Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, before I come to you, I should probably apologise for any strange background noise. I've been flung out of my hotel room. They tend to do that when your reservation's done. So I'm in the hotel lobby. I'm actually in Austin at the moment, of all places, because this is kind of the return leg of that flight I took for the US Grand Prix ages ago. But it's relatively quiet. There's a fountain. There's people walking around. You might hear the odd rolling suitcase. Mainly, I think it'll be a challenge for producer Johnny. But of course, Scott, when there's news, we have to convene, don't we? So there's great news. An 11th team in Formula One, GM Cadillac. Great news.
Yep, not Andretti Cadillac, you might call it, given that is the entity's original proposition that got rejected by Formula One 10 months ago now. It's good news. It's a big story, expanding the grid. First new team, since it will be the first new team in a decade by the time it rolls around. 2016 Haas, 2026 Cadillac, and GM, and whatever it ends up being exactly called, with whatever partner comes on board. I'm sure they'll have no shortage of options. So it's a good story for Formula One, and a good resolution to a very drawn out and controversial saga at times. It's divided opinion like no other team selection process probably could, to be honest, because it's been kind of flawed, and it's been confrontational from the very beginning, hasn't it?
Yeah, what's astounding about it is this started 21 months ago with the FIA opening the process. And I was just thinking earlier, is this good for F1 or questionable for F1? Because it's been a right mess. It's taken ages. FIA opened the procedure. F1 wasn't on board. F1 rejected them. Lots of negative headlines. But we've now got an 11th team. It's a GM team, so a proper factory team. That's sort of a great outcome for Formula One. So I was wondering, is this just genius by F1 collectively, or is it just they almost lucked into this really good situation through the rather fragmented way it worked?
Yeah, there was a point, I think we talked about this probably about a year ago now, where F1 was kind of in its worst case scenario with this whole process, because you had a situation in which the FIA had not only opened a process but had approved Andretti Cadillac, but F1's position unofficially and officially was still that it hadn't given the green light. And you just risked being in this horrible limbo that made F1 look bad, and you didn't know what the outcome would be. You know, if it got resolved in Andretti Cadillac's favour in the end, we would all be sat here thinking, well, what the hell was all that for? And if they just dug in and never accepted it, you know, it would be drawn out. There would be potentially legal action. There would be some weird consequences. There'd be huge fallout. So it just didn't feel like there could be... It didn't feel like there was a winning kind of outcome. But this compromise, I think, is really good for anyone that isn't Michael Andretti, to be honest. This kind of works out for the best. And I know what it looks like on the surface, and there's some truth to it in terms of this is an awful lot to go through just to stop Michael Andretti having a Formula One team or being involved. But the only thing I'd say, because we can get onto that in a second, but while it might look subtle on the surface, it is important to understand the significant differences between what was rejected and what has now been accepted, or what was first proposed as Andretti Cadillac, as you said, Ed, 21 months ago. Because if you remember, that was around we've had word of this plan from, I think, even before the expressions of interest was absolutely official. This started out life as basically an Andretti Formula One team that would have Cadillac stickers and branding on it and would have a Renault customer engine. And there was no concrete plan beyond that. That was what it was going to be. since then, it has evolved into something that will have full-on General Motors backing, Cadillac's parent company's backing, the Cadillac name, a GM Cadillac works engine. We'll get onto all this detail properly in a bit, and some serious players behind it in terms of investment. Now, some of those people would have been involved anyway, but Michael Andretti, who was controversial, confrontational, a cause of a lot of tension, has been sidelined. And speaking to some people who have experience of the Andretti organisation, has been replaced in Dan Towris by someone who is just simply a better manager, so a better leader of a team and organisation than Michael would have been. So I think it is unfortunate that it's played out the way it is, and it does look on the surface very petty and like a personal vendetta against Michael Andretti and a desire to stop him getting in at all costs. And then as soon as he steps aside, leaves, whatever you want to say, that entry gets accepted. It doesn't look great, but there are some actual substantial significant changes to this as well.
Yeah, and let's not forget, this is still the team that he was building. It's the same in a lot of the ways. Mario Andretti is an advisor. He's on the board of directors, so there's still Andretti involvement, but the name is conspicuous by its absence so far. But it has been an amazing saga. I mean, you said it all started with the previous version of the team, but it even started before that, didn't it? Because they almost bought Sauber before Audi did. So this is a long and winding road to get there. But I think this is a great outcome. The one thing I just hope is that the car looks a little bit better than the what I can only describe as a fairly rushed job livery they put out on their car. I don't think that's...
It's quite straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not just a base colour scheme with no sponsors on it. It's just, I think whenever you have something like this, it's good to have a visual, isn't it? But it's got it gives a few cues. It's got Cadillac on it. It's got GM on a barge board. So this is
an old GM logo.
Well, yes,
not even the most. It doesn't look like the most recent GM logo.
Well, you, like me, have had experience of being in places where logos are involved, and there's always many old versions of logos and test versions of logos that get confused. It's one of the easiest things to slip into, so I've got some sympathy for that. But yeah, long and winding road, and here we are. We've got this. So even if it's not exactly what Michael Andretti envisaged, it's still something that Michael Andretti has made happen, and he's made some positive comments about it. I think he put a post out on social media, didn't he, saying he'll be cheering it on. So it's still a win for him.
Well, he can't be too critical of something that ultimately his father's involved in as an ambassador and a non-executive director, and the exact circumstances of him relinquishing day-to-day control of Andretti Global, I don't think have ever, or might never become public, but obviously with Towers taking charge there, everything looks amicable enough on the surface. I don't know if it's like that underneath. But ultimately, he is the only real loser from this, in that he doesn't get to take his team into F1, and it doesn't even get to bear his name. I think that will sting as well, because Andretti Global is not even getting attention or recognition that it deserves as basically the partner, the entrant to this. Don't want to get into too much detail here, but you've got a situation where the parent company of Andretti Global, which I'll be honest, I don't think anyone knew existed, is now the only thing being mentioned as GM and Cadillac's motorsport partner, or however they're phrasing it. So yeah, it is a little bit convoluted, but yeah, just finishing up on the fact that it's good for F1. It is. It's a new team. It's another American team, which is a good thing. It is 2 extra seats on the grid, so a chance for young drivers to hopefully get an opportunity, different drivers to get an opportunity. Given F1's growth in the United States, I think it's very good to have those brands involved, and it's fascinating to get a manufacturer of this size. You know, General Motors is absolutely enormous, and Cadillac is quite a fun brand to be getting into Formula One. So there are loads and loads of positives to this.
Hi, it's Alexa Wybel from New York Times Cooking. We've got tons of easy weeknight recipes, and I'm gonna make 2 of my favorites for you today. For my 5-ingredient creamy miso pasta, you just take your starchy pasta water, whisk it together with a little bit of miso and butter until it's creamy. Add your noodles and a little bit of cheese. It's like a grown-up box of mac and cheese. An easy weeknight recipe that feels like a restaurant-quality dish. Next up, I'm making my vegetarian mushroom shawarma pitas. This recipe is just built for efficiency. You toss your mushrooms and red onion in your spices, throw them in the oven. By the time they're done, your sauce is ready, you've chopped your cabbage, and you're ready to assemble. It feels crazy that something that tastes this complex and looks this colorful and beautiful is actually really easy to make and takes just 20 minutes of active time. It's just delicious. New York Times Cooking has you covered with easy dishes for busy weeknights. Find these recipes and more at nytcooking.com. It smells so good.
Well, as you've explained, Scott, it's a GM Cadillac team. TWG Global is the partner. So how exactly is this team going to work? What's it made up of? How far along is it? What should we expect?
Yes, so the best way to describe it is that it's kind of your classic model for a works team, and that you have a specialist organisation that's been set up and is preparing itself to run everything, to design and build the cars and run the cars, be the race team. And it'll run under the banner of a manufacturer project, in this case Cadillac. And there will be, I'm sure, use of Cadillac's many and GM's many facilities in the US because Cadillac is a brand with motorsport heritage and competes at the top level in sports car racing, for example. And how they do that there is through a combination of a development partner in Dallara, for example, Cadillac having some involvement, and teams like Chip Ganassi Racing running the cars. So it's also not something that's specific to Cadillac or American racing. We see it in Formula One, don't we, where these teams exist as sort of specialist units to run on behalf of a manufacturer. There are precious few sort of quote unquote real works teams. You know, even Mercedes, for example, is 1/3 owned by Mercedes itself, but it's based at Brackley. The engine facilities at Brixworth. It's a British-based specialist team, part owned by a manufacturer, which is like what I expect Cadillac will be. I suspect Cadillac and GM will own part of it, and the investors. So Dan Towers, Mark Walter through. I constantly getting this wrong at the moment because acronyms are all over the place for me. But so the team's going to be, or at the moment is Cadillac Formula One, but TWG Global is the business behind it, and that's really just code for Andretti Global, because TWG, it turns out, owns Andretti. So that's kind of the kind of broad structure that exists. You have General Motors and Cadillac fronting it, and it being led by them as an entry, but the real work is being done by the organisation publicly formerly known as Andretti Global, and now TWG Global. But it's basically one and the same.
Yeah, and that's an organisation that has been developed quite significantly. It's got lots of staff. It's actively working on car design. Nick Chester's a technical director. He was at Renault in the past. Pat Simmons has got an advisor role. Maybe he'll get a more formal role now they've got the green light. Rob White's recently been confirmed that he's come in as chief operating officer. So some very experienced and good people there, as well as all the rank and file specialists you need to do it. And that's the thing I think is important to note. Regardless of all the shenanigans about the entry, will they actually get in? They've been going absolutely full steam ahead in terms of building up this team, working on car designs while this has been going on. So it's not like this project has stop-start. They've pressed on regardless, expecting to get on the grid in 2026.
Yeah, and F1 actually did indirectly reference all of the work that has been done this year in the announcement. They mentioned, I can't remember the words they used, I think it was milestones that had been achieved through the year. Organisationally, it's obviously grown. So that's the other thing. That's why, even though Andretti's kind of been washed out of the picture here, it hasn't in reality, because if that was the case, then this whole enterprise would be starting from scratch now, wouldn't it? There wouldn't be anything that Andretti Global has built up until now. So not the main headquarters in the UK, not that satellite base. In the US, not that satellite base in the UK. And I think, look, obviously it still needs to grow a lot more, doesn't it? If it's at just over 200 people, that the UK site, which is obviously going to be the F1 team itself. I don't think we need to count the engine side of this, because that will clearly be developed over time with GM and Cadillac presumably in the US, or although I imagine they'll end up having something at Silverstone in the UK. That team of 200 plus is going to need to grow 3-4 4 times at least just to get on terms with the smallest teams in F1. And even though it's going to start life as a customer, it's going to need to be, 700 or 800 strong just to stand a chance in 2026, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what they focused on so far is the design team, because that's the stuff that's got the longest lead time. So, yeah, you've got to bolster the design team, which I'm sure they'll commit more to. You've then got all of the production facilities, the race team. There's a countless, massive long list of people and departments you need to run a Formula One team. And now that this is all set, I'm sure that will open up the gates to more investment in doing all of that, because although they were pretty committed financially, they weren't going to be completely ridiculous. We should, I guess, address the thorny subject of who's paying for it, because obviously the existing teams have pushed back. Not that they actually have a say. They can offer an opinion, but it was F1 that did the yes or no on the as the commercial rights holder. But people will be familiar with talk about the $200 would that it were that. I don't think that would go down very well. Here you are, $20 each.
I could do that.
Exactly, yeah. The $200 million anti-dilution fee. However, that is current Concorde, and there's going to be a new Concorde for 26. So what does that mean?
Yes, so this will obviously be, I presume, paid for by a combination of the GM Cadillac side and then the ex-Andretti side, so TWG. So that's, Tauris and Mark Walter, who's an investor and sports franchise owner, I guess would be a good way to describe him in the US. They're going to have to cough up the money for that. The talk originally was that it could triple. It could be sort of $600-700 million as the anti-dilution fund. But I saw Andrew Benson of the BBC reported that they'll be paying more like $450 million. So kind of like a compromised figure between the two, which I think is, sensible might not be the right word when you're talking about $450 million, but in the context of 200 million supposedly being too low, and there's even been talk of that fee should be $1 billion. Like 450 is I think quite a good middle ground. So I think what that shows as well is it's just another example of the commitment and investment that's going into this. This has to be such a long-term project to justify that kind of buy-in. The expectation of the kind of returns that they'll get must be massive, both competitively and, of course, financially, to try and recoup that money and then make money off of being in F1 longer term. And I think that comes back to kind of what I was saying before about what is it about this that makes F1 think this is worth accepting. Because, there was obviously a lot of sensitivity and pressure around the Department of Justice investigation in the US. Any kind of federal government scrutiny of Formula One and Liberty Media, the owning company, is obviously not welcome. But I think it is just important to recognise that the elements of this that kind of matter from a competitive sense and a commercial sense for F1 are things like who's actually behind the team, what's it going to bring competitively, what's it going to bring commercially, and how is this any different to how it was before? And I kind of mentioned this, touched on this in the previous answer. But what F1's getting with this now is something that it is ultimately much more convinced by and actually wants, because it's too convenient just to talk about the DOJ stuff. Because if it was just that, I don't know how you feel about this, Ed, but if it was just the DOJ stuff, then Andretti Cadillac would be coming in exactly the form that it tried to come in at 11 months ago. They wouldn't be blocking Michael Andretti. They wouldn't be needing it to be more GM or leaning more into any of that stuff. They could just accept it as it was. And another part of that is back when the GM engine plan for 28 was first mentioned towards the end of last year, that was something that F1 and some key figures within F1 responded really well to in private. There was a lot of talk there, even before it got rejected, that actually that made it more serious and that they really want GM to come in. So there's always been an interest in getting GM in. And basically what they've been able to get out of this by doing it this way is kind of sideline Michael Andretti, get the part that they actually want, and as a lovely big bonus on the side, presumably end this investigation. So I just think they get a better entry. They get a better... They're happier letting this version come into Formula One because it ticks more boxes.
Yeah, and I think it works for both sides. The antitrust thing, I'm not an antitrust lawyer, but there was a reasonable case there, and I think there were other ways they could have pursued it as well. But obviously, you don't want to force a sporting entity to let you in. You don't want to take them to court because the timelines don't make sense. It's very expensive. But what you can do is use the threat of that as leverage. And then if you've got a participant that wants to come in and is committed to it, you've then got the leverage to maybe push them into being more of what you want. And everybody kind of gets what they want in the end, except maybe the other 10 teams, because we should say that anti-dilution fee, it's called an anti-dilution fee because the extra team comes in, dilutes the prize pool, doesn't it? It gets split 11 ways rather than 10 ways. So you get the anti-dilution amount that's split between the teams, that offsets it, and that is necessary because these are big companies. They draw up business plans based upon likely income and that kind of thing, and this is quite a big change in terms of what will happen. So I think this is actually just a very, very nice outcome, and I'm really interested to see how this team develops, because I've liked their spirit and the effort they've put in terms of working to build up this team. They've used time pretty well, so they're not in a completely mad scramble for 26. I think any new F1 team is always going to be in a degree of scramble ahead of coming onto the grid, but I think they've done it about as well as they can do. So, yeah, this just seems like a good win for everyone. Okay, there's a couple of other obvious details we'll address in the final part. There's the GM in-house engine coming down the line. They haven't 100% said it'll be 28, but I presume it's going to be a see how they get on, so it might be a slightly fluid timeline for that. But that means that in the interim, certainly for 26 and 27 at least, they are going to need an engine. They can't build it themselves. So what's the situation there?
Yeah, so the original plan, you're right, was 2028, as we mentioned. That's kind of shifted a little bit. GM's statement referenced being there by the end of the decade. So it could be 29 maybe if they need a little bit more time. At the moment, it looks like the most likely outcome is a Ferrari supply deal, which I think is logical for a few reasons. It obviously has a lot of experience as a supplier to customers. It supplied Haas, the last new team to come into F1 in 16. It's actually completely critical to Haas's entire existence and is still supplying Haas now. But also, crucially, it's got a slot opening up, I guess you can call it, for 26, because Sauber's a current customer at the moment and is going to be the Audi Works team in 2026. So it's going to have its own engine. It's not going to have to take a Ferrari anymore. So you have a situation there where Ferrari is logical from that point of view. Logistically, it makes sense from Ferrari's point of view. Cadillac don't need to worry about a supplier that's going to be overstretched or anything like that, because it's fully capable of supplying 3 teams. The works team and 2 customers is Ferrari. But there's also the experience that it has of supplying things like gearbox and rear suspension, which I think would be logical for Cadillac to take on as well, because those are key areas that it wouldn't have to worry about tooling up for and recruiting for and developing for in the short term for 26. It can focus on getting that stuff ready for its own engine towards the end of the 2020s. So that would make a lot of sense. There's been a few sort of links with Honda, mainly through kind of common sense, but also the fact that Honda's basically the guaranteed fallback. The way the regulations work, there is a provision in the regulations to guarantee every team gets an engine supply, so nobody gets left in the lurch. And if if a deal can't be done willingly, then the manufacturer that currently supplies the fewest teams is obligated to supply this other the team that doesn't have an engine supply. And the provision that sets includes you're exempt from that if you're a new manufacturer. So the 2 manufacturers that have the smallest supply number for 26 are Audi and Honda, but Audi is a new manufacturer, so therefore it would be Honda if they went down that route. So it's progressing as best I can work out. Ferrari's the likely one, but there's a very, very, very nice situation there where they do have Honda as a guaranteed fallback if for whatever reason they can't get a Ferrari deal over the line.
Yeah, in the same stance as I said for the entry, it's better to have a willing engine partner than one that's forced to do it. So that makes sense, and that's got a good pragmatic solution on the Ferrari side. And in a way, it's quite a nice process for the team because it means they can establish themselves for a few years, do all the non-power unit stuff while that's going on in the background, and then the team theoretically should be in a better place when the proper engine comes in, although, as regular listeners will know, we've talked about how Sauber and Audi have resoundingly not made the most of that, but that's not a topic we want to get into now. How about drivers? Colton Herta?
Yeah, he's the obvious place to start. I mean, drivers is where it gets most speculative at the moment, unsurprising, because we're 15 months out or so from the 26 season starting. But a lot of teams have their drivers for 26 signed up, so it isn't something that Cadillac can drag its heels over, or whoever ends up making the decisions there. So you mentioned Herta. When Michael Andretti was at this, spearheading this project, Herta was the number one pick. Provided he got a super license, Herta was going to be in one of the Andretti cars. It's difficult to know at the moment whether that's still the case now in the post-Andretti era. Dan Tauris is known to be a Herta enthusiast, so I think he would back it. Be interested to know sort of what Cadillac and GM think, whether Herta's the kind of driver they'd go for or they'd want someone else. The super license issue is still outstanding. Even though he had a very good season in IndyCar this year, he's still not automatically qualifying for one. Best I can work out, I think he's 8 points short of qualifying, because he'll be applying for his super license in 25, which means he has to take the 3 years previous to the year of application, which is 24, 23 and 22. And so he has, I think, 32 points from those 3 IndyCar seasons, super license points. So he's going to need basically a few FP1 outings and then top it up with whatever IndyCar result he gets, as long as he's comfortably inside the top 10 in the standings or whatever. That's his best route to it. If they want another American driver, either in the second seat or in place of Herta, if he's not eligible, the list of obvious candidates isn't massively long. There are obviously a couple that are in the kind of conventional setting, in that, well, Logan Sargent's just done 1.5 seasons or so at Williams, but he's not fast enough and crashes too much, so I don't think he'd be in the picture. One interesting one is Jack Crawford, who's he's having a pretty good F2 season. He's an Aston Martin junior, and he is actually linked to this organisation in a way, because he's Andretti's Formula E reserve and development driver for the new season. So maybe something there, but I'd be surprised if they pigeonhole themselves by going down the route of American drivers and inexperienced drivers for both seats. I mean, what would you do? One youthful American driver just to tick that box and have something fun, and then one experienced driver? Like, who's going to be the Cadillac version of Romain Grosjean?
Well, normally I would say for a brand new team, actually 2 drivers with experience is quite a good idea, unless you've got an absolute megastar rookie. They may be committed to an American driver. I'd be very interested to see how Colton Herta could do in Formula One, because he's certainly got ability, even if that still needs a bit of refinement. But yeah, it looks like it might go that way. I think there's a few obvious names. There's some experienced F1 drivers around. I mean, setting aside people who may become available, Valtteri Bottas is a name that springs to mind. I know he's my answer to everything, but experienced, great team player. He worked really well with Joe in helping Joe settle into F1 and develop. So he's a kind of experienced, he knows how Mercedes works, and he's potentially going to be in the Mercedes fold next year as a reserve, as well as the 5 years he spent with the team. So that, and he brings performance as well, so he's a good obvious one. And there's a few other experienced people out there, and if they want to go outlandish, they could try and get Sebastian Vettel or someone like that, tempt him back in. But Bottas would be the one I'd be looking at. And then I mean, if it was my team, I'd say an American driver would be great, but let's make sure we've got one that's good enough. And I think you'd have to put together some good programs for Herta to kind of start his learning curve next year, rather than trying to do it all cold in 26. But I do think he's got ability. So, but we know American companies do like having American representation, and they like have, because that plays really well in the home market. And obviously this is a global promotional thing that GM's doing with the Cadillac brand, but that does work very well. So I don't know what they're going to do, but it would be nice to have an American driver, wouldn't it? I think we'd all enjoy that, and hopefully one that can make a bigger impact than Logan Sargent did, except when it came to walls.
They could go real all American and just pluck Herta and Joseph Newgarden from IndyCar. That would be quite a good. I mean, that's 2 drivers who would definitely be on a modern version of a top 50 drivers not to make it to F1, wouldn't they? Yeah.
I mean, it would be fantastic to see Joseph Newgarden get an F1 chance, but I feel that ship has probably sailed, and that wouldn't be so wise.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would love to see it though, because some of the things he's done in IndyCar have been absolutely fantastic. One name we haven't mentioned that I think might be quite interesting is, of all of the potential kind of free agents by 26, of which there aren't that many on the current grid, Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, whether you'd be able to get him is tricky, but I think any team with a seat that's free in 26 should be seriously scoping out Tsunoda's availability.
100%.
Because he doesn't have a long-term future in the Red Bull organisation, and Honda is going to Aston Martin, where he might have a chance there, but at the moment that's looking like a Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll driver line up until Alonso retires, and then who knows? There's all kinds of links with people like Max Verstappen. Will they be able to court him? Tsunoda's a driver who, because of his backings from Honda, really, and he's not a favoured son at Red Bull, I could see him easily just and undeservedly ending up without a drive sooner rather than later, just because of the way it falls. I think he could be a really, really fun left field punt for a new team. I think that because he's got experience, but he's young, he's exciting. I just think that I think that could be quite fun.
Yeah, 100%. He should be on the list, and obviously he'll have good experience. Well, he's quite experienced now, but he'll have another year's experience come 26. So yeah, there are options for them out there. I suspect we'll get some kind of movement on the drivers, at least one of them, fairly shortly, especially if they want to go American. But I think it's also just really positive for Formula One, because that's another couple of places on the grid. And I'm sure this team will get to a good level at whatever point in the timeline. It's not easy, but having 20 cars is worse than having 22 cars. So I think it's great that there's going to be opportunities, because that'll bring in potentially new drivers, and it could avoid the risk of, as you say, a driver like Tsunoda being left without a drive for no reason, really. I just wanted to throw one other thing at you, Scott. Do you think this is going to indicate any further relenting in terms of letting in any other teams? Because obviously we had the high-tech organisation, they applied and turned down, and they were not delighted about that, and they are still not delighted. And I wouldn't be surprised if those involved with high-tech raise a few eyebrows at this as well, given there's been various things going on with the FIA in the background. So are the floodgates opening?
Well, it is interesting, because it shows to the teams that got rejected that just because you got rejected doesn't mean you're permanently rejected. But the question is whether anyone else maintained the dialogue and kept things going. Did anyone else put pressure on in through getting federal governments to investigate and things like that? But ultimately, none of those other teams had the might of a massive US manufacturer. I mean, what is GM? Is GM the biggest in terms of, it's the biggest by number of cars produced, I think, in the US, and one of the biggest in the world? I
was looking at the global figures, so I do have them to hand. So in 23, they were fifth biggest globally in terms of cars produced, behind Toyota, Volkswagen, Hyundai and Stellantis.
So they're ahead of Ford in the US, so they're the biggest in the US.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's the thing, that's the difference. And also, you mentioned high-tech. Isn't the leader of that project now the Alpine F1 boss? So
yes, indeed, and who knows if that team's going to be sold. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but let's put it this way: there could be a very low friction way to that sale happening in a year or two. That's
how high-tech gets on the grid.
Well, very, very possibly, and that's still going to be the favoured way of getting in, though, isn't it? It's going to be, Then, I mean, I personally think that working towards having a 12th and maybe a 13th strong team is good. I think Formula One should aim to do that, not open the floodgates. But yeah, it's not. This doesn't mean that it's going to be very easy to get in anymore. It just shows, in fact, how high the bar really is.
My gut feeling is that whether it becomes long term the official limit in both the regulations and the commercial agreement, my gut feeling is it'll be a 12-team cap, and it will be left at 11 teams for the foreseeable future, on the grounds that I think F1 will always want one spot available in case there's a big works team that suddenly becomes an option. Toyota decides after some time as Haas's technical partner that actually it wants its own F1 team again, but it doesn't want to buy this one. It wants to do its own thing. Or the idea of another Korean Grand Prix comes off, and then Hyundai wants a Formula One team. That's the kind of stuff that I think F1 will hold out for now. Porsche ever came back to the table, or Honda didn't work out with Aston, so they did their own thing. total hypotheticals, but I think that's the preference. So there's capacity for it, and this does show, you're right, yes, there's a high bar, but it shows it is possible. F1's not just going to be a closed shop forevermore, but yeah, I think I wrote this in the big explainer that's on the website, but we've only just got, and it's still not a 100% done deal yet, as in completely official, but in principle, we have finally got an 11th team on the grid after 21 months of trying. Maybe we shouldn't get too greedy and try and get a 12th.
Yes, I think it's probably wise to be sensible. The one that interests me manufacturer-wise down the line is Hyundai. I think that's a big enough organisation with ambitions that eventually, all things being equal, will find its way into Formula One, but that could be a very long timeline. For now, yeah, we are set to have that 11th team. There'll be lots more talk about it over the next year or so as it continues to ramp up. And yeah, good news for everyone, including the fans, because I think everybody will be happy to see 11 teams. Well, we're going to have to bring it to a close there because I have to dash off to the airport. So thanks, Scott, for the insight. A reminder to everyone that we have 2 Black Friday offers running on Patreon for the Race Members Club. One offers a 30% discount from your first month if you join either of our Racers tiers, and one of those tiers is solely F1 content. Alternatively, you can get 50% off the first month of a Champions tier membership. To get that, just enter the code CHAMP. That's CHAMP in capital letters when prompted. You'll get extra bonus podcasts, the chance to ask questions, to grill me on driver rankings, ad-free listening and more. So hit the link in the episode description or head to Patreon for more. We've also got Black Friday offers running on the Race Shop as well if you'd like to stock up on Christmas presents. And the F1 action doesn't stop, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the Qatar Grand Prix.
The Athletic.